Hello, my name is Crystal Petrie, and you are watching another episode of the Crystal Petrie Podcast, Season 3. On today's podcast, we are diving into the transformative power of storytelling with the author of Stories That Shape Us, a book that challenges us to reflect, heal, and build stronger families and communities through the narratives we live and share. This conversation isn't just about writing stories, it's about understanding how the stories we tell and the ones we hide define who we become and what we pass on to the next generation. Get ready to explore how personal truth can become a tool for collective transformation. And welcome to the podcast, Steve Mann.
Great to
How
be
are you,
here.
sir?
Well, actually, now I'm a little nervous because the way you explained this sounds far better than what I wrote. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for that. I will accept it, but I will also say that no one can explain it better than the man himself.
All right.
Yes. So, where in the world are you, Steve?
Well, right now I am at my son's house in American Fork, Utah, which is about 4 hours from where I live in St. George, Utah. St. George is down in the desert, so there's no snow, and that's why I like it.
Okay. That's why I
I,
would like it too.
I might just add that I just got back from trekking with my daughter in Patagonia. And so I've been kind of in the air a lot lately.
You've been traveling.
It's a long way down there,
Yeah. How many
but
hours
well
is
worth it.
that? Then I
Hmm?
promise we'll get to the podcast. How many hours is that to get there?
Portal to portal is about 35 hours. Probably 18 of that, 20 of that in the air.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's a
that's a
long
lot.
way down. Well, it's actually only about 500 miles from Antarctica.
What?
So it's way down there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that's your geography lesson for today. For today. Okay, so let's
Well,
get into this amazing book. So, what inspired you, Steve, to write Stories That Shape Us? Was there like a moment or a pivot in your life that realized that, you know what, I need to write this book? I need to tell people how important stories are.
like most things, it wasn't just one incident, but a
Mm-hmm.
number of things came together. One, as I got older and looked at the enormous amount of experiences that I've had around the world, I thought, I've learned a few things. It might be nice to try to pass these on to my grandchildren. But then how do you do that?
Right.
And I used to read stories from storybooks to grandchildren at night. And one time ran out of storybooks, and my wife said, well, just tell them something about when you were growing up. And my first reaction was, who cares? But I started telling them some stories. And from then on, that's all they wanted to hear. We don't want the books, Grandpa. We want to hear more stories about when you were growing up. And so I realized that my own stories that I hadn't given much thought to were really important to them. The second thing, I was telling some of these stories to my grandson, Benjamin, who was about 7. And I was telling him about his uncles, my 2 youngest sons, who were Black,
Mm-hmm.
and how that they would sometimes be followed home by the police from school or stopped when nobody else was. And Benjamin looked at me and said, Grandpa, that's dumb. Why would they do that?
We agree.
Well, it's not easy to explain things like prejudice and discrimination to a 7-year-old.
Yes.
And but in this case, he asked the question. He wanted to know more. In fact, he didn't want to let it go. So the next morning at breakfast, he brought it up with the rest of the family, and we talked for another hour or so about discrimination and where that comes from. And I kind of realized the power that stories have to help us engage in meaningful conversations that we don't often do.
Now, let me just put a caveat here, Steve, and then I'll go to my next question. The reason that it was important to point out that your sons are Black, you are a white man, and and you have Black sons. So I wanted
That's
to point that out to people that may be just listening on Apple Podcasts and maybe they don't see you. So now, end of that. Next question. How do you define shaping stories?
shaping stories. I think I think any story can be a shaping story if it's honest and it leads to conversation.
Okay.
Um, I think stories can be fun, they can be humorous, they can be informative, but too often they're just that. And the purpose of the book is to help people realize that stories can really help us engage in conversation. And that's not just with grandkids, but that's with everybody. You look at today's world and we don't talk to each other.
True.
Look at the political situation. We're at this end or that end. Most of us are in the middle, but the algorithms send us to the sides
Hmm.
and we don't talk to each other. I'm in a little empty nesters group, and we meet once a week and have people talk to us. And it's really quite an accomplished group of people. There's some um, engineers and nuclear physicists and microbiologists, and they've lived all over the world. And I thought, this was last year, I thought, boy, it'd be nice to understand what they believe about some of the political issues. So I brought it up. I said, what would you think of us taking one of the issues going on today and discussing it? Absolutely not. We don't want to offend anybody. Somebody might be upset by this. So we
Hmm.
don't want to talk about it. And I thought, what a shame. Here are the people I would really like to learn from,
Yes.
and I can't because we have all these barriers built up and won't talk to each other. That happens in families, it happens in communities, it's happened in the country. And we've got to get past that if we're going to try to solve problems.
That's the absolute truth. The absolute truth. So I want to kind of stay in that vein, Steve. What does, because you really need to be vulnerable to whether you're talking about politics, talking about racism to your grandchildren. What role does vulnerability play in sharing the stories that have shaped us?
I think there's kind of a lot of issues with that. One, we have to be willing to share. We have to be have enough belief in ourselves and the power of stories to think people might really like these. This could be helpful to people. And then I think we have to, particularly if we're talking to a group, we have to obey, I guess, a few ground rules.
Hmm.
I was asked on one podcast. A guy said, "Well, I have some great stories, but they're not true. Can I just tell them anyway?" I said, "I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
If you're telling stories to your grandkids, you really need to be honest.
Yes.
And you can elaborate if you want to, but make sure they know that. And but you need to be honest because they will detect it instantly if you're not. A second thing is I think we have to engage in discussions to understand, not to convert.
Hmm.
And so often we get in a discussion with a grandkid or a friend or a neighbor, and all we're thinking about is my reply or my rebuttal, and or how I can clobber them with some data. And we're
Yes.
not really trying to understand their point of view. And once someone understands that you really are listening, you really are want to know what they believe and why, discussion goes pretty freely.
Mhm.
But we have to open ourselves up to that.
What I like to call that is listen to reply, Steve. People are not listening to actively listen. They're listening to reply. Just like you said, they're listening to what's my comeback going to be? What's my follow up going to be? How am I going
Exactly.
to shut this person down or embarrass this person? So they're listening to reply and not listening to understand or listening to actually listen. When it comes to like telling stories, Steve, most people I feel don't have a problem telling like the good stories, the happy stories, the fun stories. How do you tell the heartbreaking stories, the failure stories, the I didn't do this right story, I failed stories? Or do you tell those stories?
I think you do. And those are those are often the most meaningful for grandchildren because they can say, I'm not the only one dealing with this. Grandpa did some dumb things too.
Yes.
And he's gone beyond that, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And often those being stupid stories or doing dumb things or making mistakes have more meaning than just the fun ones. I don't think we pick all the bad ones,
Right.
but I think we don't eliminate them either. You know, the real purpose that I had in writing the book was I think today, young people in particular are bombarded with data.
Yes.
They have access to all the data in the world instantly on their phone. They have
Yes.
stuff coming at them all over. I think what they sometimes don't have is context and perspective and ownership. And so while they're bombarded that with all this data, they often feel alone and not part of something. But if they can have conversations with a grandfather or a grandmother, a mom or a dad or a good friend, they start putting things in perspective. Oh, well, I'm feeling that way too. Maybe it's not just me. Or now I understand what happened then. I can look at that a little bit differently because I've got some perspective. Or, I feel part of that. That's part of my history too. And I think a lot of times the youth today are missing a lot of that.
They
They
are.
just have the data.
They are. You are correct. Steve, how do you weave together equally storytelling and self work whenever you are telling these stories, whether that's to your grandchildren or a friend or a family or a coworker?
Well, I think you look at that one from both sides.
Mhm.
As a storyteller, you have to have some belief that your stories are interesting to people. So often I'll talk to people and say, I don't have anything interesting to say. I haven't done anything worth talking about. And I'll say, well, okay, let's test that a little bit. I want you to think about 5 times in your life or 4 times in your life that were kind of important. Maybe you got married, you moved to a different area, you took another job. Okay, now you've got some memories of those. Why don't you pick the one you like the most and tell me a little bit about how you felt when you got there? What happened? Well, all of a sudden they're telling me a story. And I said, that's really interesting. Tell me more. And I said, that's all a story is. You don't have to think it through and have a beginning and an end and a protagonist and an antagonist. You just need to tell a little bit about your life. And you've experienced things. We all have. We've
Yes.
all had tragedies. We've all had disappointments. We've all had joys. We've all had excitement. And it's important that we share that with the other. Now, the other side of that,
Mm-hmm.
from the teller, is the listener. If that's a grandchild, and that was the lesson I talked about, grandchildren are incredibly interested in our lives and what happened and why and where we were. I had a interesting experience with one of my sons once. We were packing to move from Idaho to Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
And in the packing process, they came across some pictures of me with President Reagan and President Ford and President Bush. And they pulled these out and said, what are these? Did you Photoshop these, Dad? And I realized we had never discussed the work I had done at the White House. They knew nothing about it. And, one of the pictures was at Berlin, at Checkpoint Charlie, President Reagan. And that gave me, they wanted to know about that. How did I get there? Well, what was the importance of Checkpoint Charlie? And all of a sudden, we were talking about history because they were asking the questions. And so don't ever feel like they're not interested. They are.
Steve, you just passed through that like that was not a big deal. You knew President Reagan and President Bush. Like, what? I know we're talking about stories that shape us on this podcast, but that is definitely a story I would like to hear.
Well, that's what my kids had to say.
Wow, you have
um,
amazing stories.
I was fortunate enough to be with President Reagan in a trip to Berlin
Mhm.
when he stepped across the line at Checkpoint Charlie and looked up at the guards and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall."
You were with him during that famous line?
I was there and looking at the German guards who didn't know what to do, and looking at the Secret Service who didn't know what to do, and President Reagan with a big smile on his face. So it was a great moment to have been there.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I'm still very interested, but we're gonna move on. Okay. How do people know what stories to tell? Whether that's good stories or the bad stories. How do you know which ones to tell? Does it depend on the situation? Does it depend on the audience?
Well, I think it depends on the audience a little bit, but generally you can start anywhere.
Okay.
If I'm talking to a business audience, I try to tell stories that are easy for me to pull thoughts and ideas from that experience and share with them that might be more important to a businessman. Uh, I don't necessarily share stupid stories of when I was a kid. With my
Mhm.
grandkids, they love to hear those stupid stories. And it makes them feel like, hey, one, grandpa's kind of crazy, and that's part of me.
Yes.
Uh, so you do shape the stories a little bit, but generally, you can start with just about anything. The key is, I think you tell the story, and hopefully it has a little bit of interest to people.
Mhm.
And then you ask some questions. How did that story make you feel? What did you think about that when you heard that story? What stories do you have that relate to that? And tell me some of those. And now you're engaged in a discussion.
How do the stories that we don't tell, Steve, impact our family and impact our friends?
I think for the most part, we don't tell stories at all. And
Yeah, that's true.
the result of that is we don't pass on the things we have learned and the feeling, emotion, and perspective that goes with that. You think about the history of man and you look at those pictures on the caves in France and where they tried to depict the hunt because
Hmm.
it was so important to pass that on to the next
Yes.
generation. That was survival. And I think in these recent generations, we have abdicated that to social media and the internet, and we don't talk anymore. We don't share those. And I think that creates an enormous loss to the next generation. That we really have an obligation to share our experiences, to share what happened, to pass on that wisdom, because they're not going to find it on the internet.
Yes.
They're not going to find it in social media. They're going to find it when we talk to them one on one and they can see us and we can see them and we can feel the emotion and they can ask questions about it and see that. They desperately need that kind of interaction to give balance and meaning and a connection to their own lives.
Steve, speaking of social media for the most part shows perfection. It shows we're always happy, we're never sad, nothing bad ever happens to us. That is what, for the most part, it's not 100%, but for the most part, that's what social media shows us. How can we reclaim authenticity in our stories that we tell when all we see is perfection on social media?
Well, first, I'm shocked. You mean bad things happen to people? Um, it's true. Even in our daily lives, how are you? I'm fine. That's as far as it goes.
Yes.
And we don't get to understand what's really happening. And we think everybody else is perfect, and then we think we're terrible because we don't do that. Um, a couple of experiences, some of the books, some not. But a long time ago, when I was first married, I came home and my wife was in tears. I said, "What's wrong?" And she had been reading a church magazine, and it was talking about how this person did this perfectly, and this person did baked pies and took it to her friends, and this person visited everybody, and this person did this. She says, "I don't do all those things." I said, "Neither does anybody else." That same person who baked the pie was probably beating her kids. You
Oh,
don't know.
yeah.
You only see one little piece. And I think that damages us
Mm-hmm.
when we think everybody else is the ideal and we're not. Just one other quick story. When I was a kid, I grew up on a farm,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad had had a lot of crop failures, and he had this one crop, onion seed. And onion seed grows on like 3-4 foot stalks with these big blossoms, and when they're ready to harvest, you can shake them and hear it sounds like a rattle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, they're beautiful. The day before the harvest, wind came through, knocked them all down, all gone. And my dad came into the house and said, "Pack up, we're going to McCall," which is a resort about 4 hours or 2 hours away. And we came back, and my dad was the church leader at the time. We go into church on Sunday, and people start saying, "Well, Bishop, how are you? Couldn't be better. Life is great. Bishop, how are you?" And I kind of listened to that. And so after church, I said, "Dad, why do you tell everybody everything's great when I know it's not?" And he said, "Son, I've been the bishop for these people for 7 years. I know their lives. I wouldn't trade anything of mine for anything of theirs." That has stayed with me my whole life,
Yes.
because we don't see that. All we project, and we do that ourselves, we project the good things. And when we do only project the good things, we don't convey balance to other people. And that gives them misconceptions and does not help them grow or us grow.
What do you think are some common barriers that keep people from telling their stories?
What keeps people from telling their stories?
Yes.
I think number one is they just they don't think they have anything important to say.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think their life has been of any great value worth passing on, and they're absolutely wrong about that. Everybody's life has value. Everybody's has experienced things worth passing on. Sometimes they feel like they're just not very good storytellers, and so they don't start. Sometimes our lives are so busy that I don't want to interrupt what they're doing here. I don't want to interrupt what they're doing there. And I have something I'd like to say, but I don't want to interrupt. And so we never quite get around to it. And we don't maybe have enough confidence in our own experiences, our own ability to talk, to tell our own stories, so we don't do it. And that's unfortunate, because I think children lose so much because they aren't able to pick up that context.
How do stories connect us across generation, racial, or even cultural?
You know, I have a great grandfather
Mm-hmm.
who grew up in England. He was, from all accounts, a bastard son who was taken in by his uncle, and he joined the church that I belong to now. But his uncle hated that. He also had developed a girlfriend, and his uncle hated her. And so one night, in the middle of the night, he got a rope and he escaped from his uncle's house, picked up his girlfriend, went to a boat, got on the boat, and got married to her on the boat. They got to New York, and then they had to figure out how to get across the country to Salt Lake City. Well, that's all I know about his story. I would love to know what he was feeling. What was it like when he got to New York? What was it like trying to figure out, how do I get across the whole continent? What were his feelings about his wife? What were his feelings about his uncle? I don't know any of that. What I do know is that he took enormous risk in
Huge.
his own life and his wife's life and everything else. And I can say, that's part of me. My great-great-grandfather did that. He had the courage to follow his convictions. And so maybe that's inside of me somewhere too. And but that generation, knowing those stories from generation, can give us hope. I was talking to a fellow not too long ago who had some great stories. He grew up in Las Vegas in the 50s, when Las Vegas was one of the most segregated cities in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And he was white. His uncle had a business on the black side of town, washing sheets and things for hotels. So when he was about 14, his dad sent him over there to work. He was terrified. He had a boss who just sat on this stool and told him to do different things. And he thought, well, this guy's lazy. And then one day, this boss says, could you take me home? Well, I don't really like you, but okay, I'll take you home. So he did that a few days. He said, well, and could you pick me up? Well, okay. So he did that. And then one day he says, well, could you honk when you get to the house a few minutes so I can make sure I get out to see you? And he said, can you lazy guy, can't you at least get up? He says, then after about a month of this, I started talking to him and realized that he had had his first child when he was just early high school, dropped out of high school, never really learned to read or write very well, now had 3 kids. His wife and he both had 2 jobs, so their kids could be going to college. And he said, I realized that the reason he wanted me to honk is because he probably just got home from his other job a half hour before. He said, that changed my whole view of him, of the issues going on with segregation in Las Vegas at the time. And I said, have you written this down anywhere? And he's a wonderful storyteller. He says, no. I says, you really need to. I says, somewhere, maybe it's going to be your great-great-grandson who you will never know, who will read that story and go, wow, I never thought of it that way. And that's my great-grandfather who experienced that. Think of that contribution that you're not giving him or her because you're not writing that story. And he goes, I never thought of it that way. You're right. I'm going to start writing down these stories. But we don't realize the impact that our stories can make. I write a lot of times, I think maybe I've got a great-great-grandson who I'll never know, who's suffering maybe from anxiety and depression and is not sure what to do with his life. And maybe he reads something that I wrote, who said, Grandpa wasn't always excited about life, but he was most of the time. I wonder if I'm part of that. How could I pick up that? And that might change what happens to him. And so I think I have an obligation, and everybody else does too, to share our experiences so our posterity can learn from that.
Steve, was the boss white or black of your
The boss
friend?
was black.
The boss.
Everybody in the place he was working was black except him.
You know what? And this is me just reaching. Was that his first experience with black people when his dad sent him over there to work?
Well, he would have seen black people around, but the schools and the businesses were all segregated then.
Yes,
Remember, Sammy Davis couldn't go into a casino.
I remember
He
that.
had to go through
Yes.
the back door. And so he certainly had seen black people. I talked to people, but never been in close interaction and never had a
Yes.
boss who was black.
Yes. And that probably changed his entire idea, perspective, and thoughts about Black people.
Totally. Totally.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So, Steve Mann, you are the author of Stories That Shape Us. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. I feel real privileged, is the word. I feel so privileged to have you on this podcast. Can you share how your book has changed your own relationship with your family dynamic?
I can. Um, it's the first book I've ever written. And writing a book is an incredible process. You learn a lot about yourself and everything that you did, and you try to put it in perspective and put it in different places. And when you finish, you think of all the things you should have said and how you could have said them better. Um, but my son, Jeffrey, who will be on the podcast soon, has done the marketing. And we had a kind of open house for the launch of the book. And so some of my grandkids were there, and they all had a book that they wanted me to sign. And I got home, and the next day, his mother sent me a picture of him at 8 years old reading this book, and came to her and said, "Mom, I know what I want to be. I want to be an author."
What?
And we now have had
Hey.
discussions about writing and how to do that. And, and our interactions are different. This Christmas, we're going to be up in Park City with all of the family together. And one of the things I will do at night is take the book, and those who are interested, I'll start reading some stories. And the stories from the book are just the entry. The real purpose is, how did that story make you feel? What do you think about Grandpa now?
Yeah.
Have you ever done anything like that? Tell me your story. So it gets us away from television and the internet into talking with each other.
Right. That is so important because people don't talk anymore. They just text or they send messages. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, conversation, verbal conversation, I will say, is really going out the window. Is one of the reasons I really love this podcast because it does allow for conversations. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it allows for conversation between me and amazing people. I love it.
Now
Yeah.
that's great. I've had the good fortune to live and work in places all over the world
Hmm.
with all kinds of ethnicities and colors and traditions and values. And 98% of us are all the same. We eat a few different things, we dress a little bit differently,
Yes.
but we all have the same hopes and fears and concerns and values. And one of my wishes that is not going to happen is I wish I could jump into other people's body just for an hour. I want to make sure I can get back out because I like my
Yes.
own, but I just like to be in their body to understand how they think and how they feel and why they see things the way they do. Wouldn't that be incredible? I think
Yes.
if we could all do that, we wouldn't be having war and all the kinds of things we have today.
I agree. I completely agree, Steve. I completely agree. How can organizations and leaders use storytelling to build healthier, more connected communities within the workplace?
I think uh, almost all good managers or good leaders uh, tell stories. Uh, I listen to a lot of talks from my church leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes those talks are scriptural and, this happened and this happened. More often, they tell stories about an experience they had or somewhere they were and what happened. I remember the stories. I don't remember the scriptures and I don't remember all of those things, but I remember the stories.
Yes.
And they have learned that stories convey important values and principles far better than memorized pieces of data or just information. And that's true not just, I think, in a church setting, it's true in a business setting.
Mm-hmm.
Long time ago, we were creating a program for supervisors. And up until then, all the programs for supervisors had been do this, do this, do this. And what we did is we said, let's go first find out what supervisors really do. Well, they didn't sit making flow charts. Supervisors were dealing with somebody who had bad body odor or showed up late or didn't
Oh,
know how to do
wow.
their job. And so we said, let's teach them how to do that. So we made some short videos showing somebody doing that and then talked about how to do that. But it's a story that interested them.
Mm-hmm.
We could have just written it all down and nobody would ever have looked at it.
No, not at all.
But when they saw the story, they go, I do that. I do that same thing. How do they solve that? Then they're interested and they're asking the questions.
How does forgiveness, or rather, what role does forgiveness play in reshaping the stories that we tell about our past? I have an idea, but I want to hear what you say first.
Well, the first thing I would say is that most of us, don't do a very good job of forgiving ourselves.
Mhm.
We hold on to mistakes and errors and bad things, and we let that shape our lives. And when we do that, it's hard to make progress. It's hard to form uh, interesting, good relationships because we are so focused on what we did wrong or a mistake we had made. And we do that to other people. We judge
Mhm.
them on the worst thing they ever did. And if we can't get past that, then it's hard to move ourselves forward and do other things with our own lives. It's hard to help other people. I spend a few minutes in the mornings doing a little meditation and what are the things that I'm grateful for. And one of the things I'm always grateful for are the teachings of Jesus Christ, which are basically the same teachings of all the religions, of mercy, of kindness, of forgiveness. And that if you do that, especially forgiving yourself, you can move forward. You can have a better life. You can make other people have better lives. You can bring joy to the world instead of just sadness.
I was thinking, and I am in total agreement with that, Steve. I was thinking that with forgiveness, if you tell your story, people are more likely to forgive you because now they have an understanding or context for why you said what you said or why you did what you did.
I
Because
think that's absolutely
normally,
true.
yeah, normally when people react to something outwardly or inwardly, when they react, it's based on something from their past, maybe how they were raised or something that they saw or someone that they heard or maybe something that happened to them.
Yeah.
And so when you tell that story, people are more likely to forgive you because, okay, I see why she did that. I know why he said that. So that's what I was thinking as far as, forgiveness and the storytelling. It really goes hand in hand because it humanizes you, really.
Well, it does. It gives context, it
Yes.
gives perspective.
Yes.
Oh, that's why. That's
Yes.
how come they think that way. That's how come they did that. And maybe that also says, but that was then. They have changed. maybe I can accept them for who they are now, not something they did 20 years ago.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I think that forgiveness works on both sides.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so Steve, what are some tools from your book that people can start implementing and start using immediately?
One of my regrets about the book is we put in on my website a bonus chapter. And the bonus chapter is how to talk to your friends and family about difficult issues.
Ooh, that's good.
Well, we put it in there thinking, well, maybe that will lead people and then they'll look at get the book. But what seems to be happening is people read the book, but they never get around to downloading the bonus chapter. So I wish I
Oh,
had
okay.
put it in the book. But in there, I outline some principles or some guidelines to help us engage in conversation.
Okay.
We're coming up in Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are going to go home and be terrified that Uncle Charlie's going to be there?
They're having those
Is
conversations already.
yeah. And or I'm not going because Uncle Charlie's going to be there.
Yes, yes.
And or oh, how am I even going to deal with this? And these are the people, our family, we really would like to learn from, but anymore we can't. So some of the principles I outlined, we've talked about a little bit already, is just when you get together, say, okay, here's our ground rules as a family this Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
One, when we talk to each other, we're talking to learn and to understand. No conversion this year.
No conversion
No
and no
trying to,
listen to reply. No
that's
listen to
right.
reply.
Number two, don't try to bombarding me with data. I just want to talk to you. I don't want to get clobbered with stuff that I have no idea whether it's real or not. And I think the third thing I would say is just try. Sit down with Uncle Charlie or just somebody and say, can I try something with you? I would like to know how you feel about something. And here's some ground rules I'd like to set. Not going to try to convert. Don't want you to convert me. I just want to ask questions so I understand you better.
Yes.
Just do that with one family member, and then maybe you could expand it.
Absolutely. And then you can have more family members over for the holidays.
That's right. Maybe even Uncle Charlie will be welcome.
Maybe even Uncle Charlie will come and sit at the table. So, as we get ready to wrap up, Steve, you are the author of Stories That Shape Us. What was your intention in writing that book?
That's interesting because my intentions changed as I started writing the book. Originally, it was just to write down some stories.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became, you know what, I can use these stories to convey principles and beliefs and traits that are important to me. So I outlined a series of traits and principles and beliefs that are important to me, and I illustrated each of them with stories. And with each story would ask questions. So it made that first iteration. Then partway through, I said, you know what? I bet a lot of people would like to do the same thing. They'd like to be able to convey some of what they have learned and the principles they find important to others. So I then changed it again to become kind of a workbook. So my intention at the end of it was that people would read the book and start engaging in meaningful conversations with their children, their grandchildren, and the people around them.
Okay, so my final question for you, Steve. Who do you think would make a great guest to come on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
Okay, well, we kind of made some progress on that one.
Yes.
One of my sons who is Black, Jeff, who organized this podcast for me, he's in fact, he just started his own company, but he's a PR guy, and he has a podcast of his own. He's been my marketing manager for putting things together. We adopted him when he was about 3 weeks old. So he grew up in a white family, but he also spent 6, 7 years of his life in Africa. 3 years in Zimbabwe when I was working on AIDS prevention, 3 years in South Africa when I was doing things for my church, and another 3 years he spent, or 2 years he spent in Ghana as a missionary. And so he's had quite a fascinating life. And we work together a lot, which is a great joy for me. And I think he would be a great guest, and to talk about either the things that he's done, or growing up in a white family as a Black kid, or whatever you felt might be interesting to your audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve, again for being on this podcast. I am so excited. I said this before we started the podcast. How lucky am I to have you on the podcast twice, and to be able to talk to you and have conversations with you more than one time.
Well, thank you so much. It's been just fun being with you, and I look forward in next month being with you and my son Jeff.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Steve. And to my community, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get Steve's podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.